The MTV Video Music Awards after-party on September 9th, 1992, was in full swing when Courtney Love spotted Lynn Hirschberg across the crowded room at the Chateau Marmont. What happened next would require 7 witnesses, 2 security guards, and would end with Kurt Cobain doing something that nobody who knew him as the quiet, passive grunge icon could have predicted. Hirschberg had just published her Vanity Fair article Strange Love that nearly destroyed Kurt and Courtney's life, leading to their newborn daughter Frances Bean being temporarily removed from their custody. Now, 3 weeks after the article's publication, the journalist who had smiled at Courtney during interviews while secretly recording her most vulnerable moments was standing 20 feet away, champagne glass in hand, chatting with record executives as if she hadn't just attempted to destroy a family. What the security cameras captured was brutal and swift. But what they didn't capture was the conversation that happened immediately after, when Kurt Cobain, the man who avoided confrontation at all costs, walked up to the bloody journalist and whispered something that made her leave Los Angeles the next day and never write about musicians again. The story of that night had been buried for decades, with Vanity Fair's lawyers ensuring the footage never saw public release. But in 2021, a security guard who had witnessed everything finally broke his silence, revealing not just what Courtney did, but what Kurt said that proved to be more devastating than any punch. September 9th, 1992, 11:47 p.m. The Chateau Marmont's penthouse suite was packed with music industry elite, celebrating MTV's biggest night. Nora had just performed Lithium at the awards show, with Kurt creating controversy by spitting on the piano keys. But that minor rebellion was nothing compared to what was about to happen. Courtney Love entered the party wearing a torn white dress that she'd worn specifically to mock Hirschberg's description of her as trainwreck chic in the article. Frances Bean, just 3 weeks old, was with a nanny at the hotel, as Kurt and Courtney were still fighting to regain full custody after the Vanity Fair piece had prompted child services to investigate them. Courtney walked in like she was looking for someone, recalled Tommy Martinez, a photographer covering the party. She wasn't mingling, wasn't drinking, she was hunting. Lynn Hirschberg was holding court near the bar, surrounded by editors and publicists, apparently retelling stories from her recent interviews. According to witnesses, she was actually discussing the Vanity Fair article, defending her portrayal of Courtney as journalistic integrity. She was laughing about it, said Rachel Stevens, a publicist who was standing nearby. Hirschberg was actually saying that Courtney should thank her because the controversy was selling records. That's when I saw Courtney approaching. Kurt was on the opposite side of the room, trapped in conversation with David Geffen about the band's next album. He had his back to the bar area and didn't see Courtney walking toward Hirschberg with what witnesses described as terrifying calmness. The first indication something was wrong came when conversation started dying in waves across the room. People were turning to watch Courtney's approach, sensing the tension building. "Hey, Lynn," Courtney said loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Nice party. How's it feel to be celebrating while my baby is in a foster home because of your lies?" Hirschberg, according to witnesses, tried to maintain professional composure. "Courtney, this isn't the place." "When is the place?" Courtney interrupted. "When you're interviewing me while secretly recording? When you're twisting my words about rehab to make it sound like I was using while pregnant? When exactly is the place, Lynn?" The room had gone completely silent. Even the music seemed to fade as everyone watched the confrontation. Security guards started moving closer, but nobody wanted to be the first to intervene. Hirschberg made a fatal error then. She smiled, the same sympathetic, condescending smile she'd worn during their interviews. "Courtney, you said those things. I simply reported them. Maybe if you're upset about how you appear in print, you should examine your behavior rather than blaming the messenger. But that's not all you reported, was it?" Courtney's voice was dangerously quiet. "You reported things I said were off the record. You reported things you overheard in private conversations. You reported rumors from people who hate me and presented them as facts." Then Hirschberg said the words that would push Courtney over the edge. "Well, maybe Frances is better off in foster care if this is how her mother behaves in public." The punch came so fast that security cameras almost missed it. Courtney's right fist connected with Hirschberg's jaw with such force that the journalist's champagne glass shattered as she fell backward into the bar. The sound, flesh hitting flesh, glass breaking, gasps from the crowd, created a moment of chaos. But Courtney wasn't done. As Hirschberg tried to get up, blood running from her split lip, Courtney grabbed a bottle of champagne from the bar. "You want to write about rock and roll?" Courtney shouted. "This is rock and roll. This is what it looks like when you destroy people's lives for a story." Security guards finally reached them, grabbing Courtney before she could swing the bottle. But that's when Kurt appeared. Everyone who knew Kurt Cobain described him as conflict avoidant, soft-spoken, someone who would rather hurt himself than others. So what happened next shocked everyone who witnessed it. Kurt walked calmly through the crowd, which parted for him like he was Moses. He gently took the champagne bottle from Courtney's hand, set it on the bar, and then turned to face Hirschberg, who was being helped to her feet by two publicists. "Kurt, I'm sorry this happened," Hirschberg started, dabbing at her bloody lip. "But you have to understand, I was just doing my job." Kurt held up his hand to stop her. Then, in a voice so quiet that people had to strain to hear, he said, "Your job? Let me tell you about your job. You came into our home when Courtney was 7 months pregnant. You ate our food, played with our cats, acted like a friend. Courtney told you about her past trauma, her fears about being a mother, her struggle with addiction before she got pregnant, all because you said you wanted to write about strong women in rock." The room was dead silent. Kurt's voice remained calm, almost conversational, which made it more terrifying than if he'd been screaming. "Then you took those vulnerabilities, those moments of trust, and you weaponized them. You took quotes out of context. You implied she used drugs while pregnant when you knew she'd been clean since she found out. You know what the medical records show. Frances was born perfectly healthy, no drugs in her system. But you buried that fact in paragraph 19 while putting the speculation in paragraph 2. Hirschberg tried to interrupt. "The public has a right to know." "The public has a right to know?" Kurt's laugh was bitter. "You want to know what the public should know? 3 days after your article came out, Child Services took our daughter. Our 2-week-old daughter, Courtney, had to take supervised drug tests every day for a month. All negative. While you were getting congratulated on your explosive expose." Kurt stepped closer to Hirschberg and security moved forward, but he raised his hands showing he meant no physical harm. "But here's what you don't know, Lynn. Here's the exclusive you missed. Every night, since they took Frances, Courtney cries herself to sleep. Not because of the drugs she never took while pregnant, but because she trusted you. She thought you were different from the other vultures. She thought you actually cared about telling the truth." Tears were now running down Courtney's face as security continued to hold her back. Kurt wasn't done. "You want to know the real story? The real story is that Courtney got clean the day she found out she was pregnant. The real story is that she's been fighting like hell to be a good mother, despite having no role model for what that looks like. The real story is that your article, your journalism, nearly drove her to suicide last week." Gasps rippled through the crowd. This was news to everyone, including some of Nirvana's inner circle. "Yeah," Kurt continued, his voice finally showing emotion. "Last Tuesday, I found her in the bathroom, with a bottle of pills, reading your article, convinced that Frances would be better off without her since, according to you, she's an unfit mother. I had to physically wrestle the pills away from her. That's your journalism, Lynn. That's your legacy." Hirschberg was crying now, whether from pain, shame, or fear was unclear. But Kurt still wasn't finished. "So here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice returning to that eerie calm. "You're going to leave this party. You're going to leave Los Angeles. And you're never going to write about my family again. Not because I'm threatening you. I don't do threats, but because if you have even a shred of humanity left, you'll realize that your words have consequences. They nearly killed the woman I love and took away our child." Then Kurt said the thing that would haunt Hirschberg forever. "One day, you might have children. And one day someone might write lies about you that cause those children to be taken away. When that happens, remember this moment. Remember that you had the chance to be human, to be decent, to tell the truth, and you chose the story instead." Kurt then turned to Courtney, still being held by security. He gently touched her face and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "She's not worth it, baby. Francis needs us both out of jail." Then, to everyone's amazement, Kurt addressed the entire room. "Everyone here is a witness. Lynn Hirschberg published lies about my wife using heroin while pregnant. The medical records prove Francis was born drug-free. The doctor's testimonies prove Courtney was clean throughout the pregnancy. Yet Vanity Fair published speculation as fact, causing our newborn to be taken by the state. That's not journalism, it's character assassination." He pulled out a manila envelope from his jacket. Nobody had noticed he was carrying it. "These are the medical records. These are the drug test results. These are the testimonies from our doctors. Anyone who wants to see the truth versus what Vanity Fair published is welcome to look. We're suing for defamation, and every person in this room is now a potential witness." The revelation that Kurt had come to the party prepared with documentation showed a level of calculated planning nobody expected from him. This wasn't a random confrontation. It was an ambush. David Geffen later said, "I've never seen anything like it." Kurt played the wounded poet so well that everyone forgot he was also brilliant. He didn't just defend Courtney. He destroyed Hirschberg's credibility in front of every important person in the industry. Security finally released Courtney, who collapsed into Kurt's arms. The couple stood there, holding each other while Hirschberg was escorted out by her entourage. But before she left, she turned back and said something that would prove prophetic. "This isn't over. The truth about you two will come out eventually." Kurt's response was immediate. The truth is that we're two fucked up people trying to raise a daughter and make music. But at least we admit we're fucked up. You pretend to be righteous while destroying lives for profit, which is worse." After Hirschberg left, something unexpected happened. The room, filled with industry people who usually thrived on scandal, began to applaud, not for the violence, but for Kurt's defense of his family. It was a rare moment of humanity in a business built on exploitation, but the night wasn't over. As Kurt and Courtney were preparing to leave, they were approached by Anna Wintour, editor of Vogue, who had witnessed everything. "That was quite a performance," she said to Kurt. "It wasn't a performance," Kurt replied. "It was the truth." "I know," Wintour said. "That's why I'm offering Courtney a chance to tell her side. A full interview, fact-checked, with medical records included. No sensationalism, just the truth." This unexpected offer from fashion's most powerful editor showed how Kurt's speech had shifted the narrative. Suddenly, Courtney wasn't the villain, she was the victim of predatory journalism. The security footage of the punch was indeed suppressed by Vanity Fair's lawyers, but dozens of witnesses meant the story spread throughout the industry within hours. However, what spread faster was Kurt's devastating takedown of Hirschberg. Kurt did something brilliant, music journalist David Fricke later analyzed. He turned a potential assault charge into a referendum on journalism ethics. By the next morning, the story wasn't Courtney Love punches journalist, it was journalist who lied about baby drives mother to attempted suicide. The aftermath was swift. Lynn Hirschberg never wrote another music profile. She transitioned to writing about fashion and food, staying far away from musicians. Years later, she would admit, in a private conversation, that Kurt's words that night had fundamentally changed how she saw her profession. Courtney and Kurt got Francis back 2 weeks later. The judge, having reviewed the medical evidence Kurt had been carrying that night, ruled that the Vanity Fair article had been misleading at best, malicious at worst, and that there was no evidence of prenatal drug use. But the most lasting impact was on how Kurt was perceived. The quiet, mumbling grunge icon had revealed himself to be fiercely protective and surprisingly strategic. As Courtney later said, "People always thought I was the aggressive one, and Kurt was passive." That night showed everyone the truth. Kurt was a warrior when it came to protecting his family. He just chose his battles very, very carefully. The punch itself became rock mythology, but those who were there say the real violence was Kurt's words. Physical wounds heal, but being systematically dismantled in front of your entire professional community leaves permanent scars. Tommy Martinez, the photographer, captured one image from that night that never made it to publication. Kurt and Courtney leaving the party, her knuckles bloody, his arm around her, both of them looking exhausted, uttered victorious. In the background, barely visible, is a champagne stain on the wall where Hirschberg had fallen. That photo captured everything, Martinez said. The violence, the protection, the exhaustion of being constantly under attack, but also the unity. They were facing the world together. The incident also revealed something about Kurt that few understood at the time. Beneath the fragile, sensitive exterior was someone capable of devastating precision when pushed too far. He had come to that party knowing Hirschberg would be there, carrying documentation, ready for confrontation. The only surprise was Courtney throwing the punch. Everything else was calculated. Kurt was playing chess while everyone else was watching a bar fight, observed Danny Goldberg, Nirvana's manager. He turned Courtney's impulsive violence into a strategic victory. It was brilliant and terrifying. In the weeks that followed, several publications that had been preparing similar hit pieces on Courtney quietly killed their stories. The message was clear: attacking Kurt and Courtney's parenting would now come with consequences. Not violent ones, but something worse: public humiliation and legal action. The irony, of course, was that Hirschberg's article had tried to paint Courtney as an unfit mother, and Kurt as a passive enabler. The confrontation at the Chateau Marmont revealed the opposite: Courtney as a mother driven to violence by lies about her child, and Kurt as a calculating defender capable of destroying careers with words. Years later, Francis Bean Cobain would say, "I've read the Vanity Fair article, I've also seen the medical records from my birth. The disconnect between what was published and what was true is staggering. My parents weren't perfect, but they didn't deserve that." The punch at the Chateau Marmont became a defining moment in rock history. Not because of the violence, but because of what it represented. It was the moment when grunge's biggest stars stopped being victims of the media and started fighting back. It was messy. It was brutal, but it was also necessary. As Kurt had said that night, this is rock and roll. But it was also something more. It was parents protecting their child, truth confronting lies, and the powerful discovering that sometimes the powerless have heaven left to lose. The security guard who finally broke his silence in 2021 concluded his account with this observation: "I've worked security for 30 years. I've seen hundreds of celebrity fights, but I've never seen anything like Kurt Cobain that night. He didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten anyone, didn't touch anyone. But he destroyed that journalist more completely than any punch ever could. It was the most polite annihilation I've ever witnessed." Today, the Chateau Marmont has a small plaque in the penthouse suite that mysteriously appeared one night. It simply says, "Truth is the best revenge, September 9, 1992. Nobody knows who put it there, but staff have been told to leave it alone. The punch heard round the rock world had landed, but it was Kurt's words that left the lasting bruise. As he had warned Hirschberg that night, words have consequences. She learned that lesson in the most public, humiliating way possible. And somewhere in Seattle, a baby named Frances Bean slept peacefully in her parents' arms, unaware that her father had just won the first battle in what would be a lifelong war to protect her from those who would was her for their own gain. If this incredible story of parental fury and justice moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who understands that sometimes violence isn't the answer, but sometimes it's the question, and the answer is yes. Have you ever witnessed someone defending their family against lies? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more untold stories about rock's most explosive moments.